Thank you all for joining us today, and thank you especially to Phuc for joining
Yeah,
us.
thanks, Ray.
And just off what Nita said, my first question was going to be, I guess, the Renaissance man question. So
Oh boy, here we go.
so you've taught Latin, you've written a memoir, you've written children's books, and you're a tattoo artist. Which of those is the hardest to do, and why?
Oh gosh, it really depends on the day. It depends on the students who are in the Latin classroom. Depends on if I'm struggling with writer's block. It depends on if I've gotten rough edits from my editor for the children's book. So I think it varies. And I would say it's not really for me. I think I want to view those things as the idea of things being hard. I think I'm more excited about the challenge that sort of is lying before me. So I get very excited. I think it speaks to my personality. Plot twist. I went off to college to double major in art and English, and then I stopped doing that very quickly. I was sitting in my college dining hall, and I heard a kid sitting at a table next to me, and he was just saying how he was taking ancient Greek, and it was the hardest thing that he had ever done, and my ears perked up, and I was like, what? This is the hardest thing you've ever done? And I immediately signed up for ancient Greek, because I was like, so I think that's just some kind of head trauma that I have, that so this is a true story. When my wife and I first got together, maybe within the first 5 or 10 years, and she said, okay, so real talk, we're married now. If you want to do something like hike Mount Everest or Kilimanjaro or something like that, just do it now. Just get it out of the way. I support you. But there's a point at which you're going to cross this threshold of things that you're going to do that are going to kill you. And I don't know if I necessarily want to. She put an expiration date on things that I was going to do to kill myself. Yeah. No, I mean, she's still, I mean,
So have you missed your chance to hike Kilimanjaro?
I just decided it was actually, well, I mean, this is contra. I mean, no. I mean, I still hike. I love hiking, and I hike a lot. But I think I think I just read the John Krakauer book, and I was like, I want to, this sort of I was like, this sounds like the hardest things anyone's ever done. I want to do this, or die trying. It's going to make a good story. So no, I just decided. There's a lot of the that's involved in hiking Everest that. I'd rather just go up to Mount Washington with less infrastructure, but yeah.
So the things that you've done are not hard enough, basically, is what you're telling us.
No,
you
I
haven't
just
found the hardest thing yet.
No, they're always hard. I mean, they're hard, but I think you kind of you hit a rhythm or I mean, to be totally honest, I don't think tattooing is not hard now. I've been tattooing for 27 years, and it just very recently is so delightful and enjoyable, and I just love sitting with the clients, and everything is really great about it, and that took 27 years to sort of get to that space. The first 10 years was just a total. But sorry to all my customers from the first decade of tattoo. It was very hard, I was sweating every tattoo that I did, and partly because I was not that good at it, and also I just had very high standards. So it's I think at some point the gap between sort of what I want my tattoos to look like and what they actually look like is narrowed to an acceptable degree.
What's that thing they say about 10,000 hours?
Yeah.
It takes 10,000 hours to get really skilled at something.
I haven't added up the hours, but yeah, I hope I've hit that.
So which of these things that we just mentioned, if any, did you want to be when you grew up?
Yeah, none of these. So Top Gun had just come out in 1983 or 84, I think, and so I really wanted to be a Top Gun pilot for a minute. Actually, I actually always wanted to be a teacher, but I thought I would be an English or an art teacher maybe, and then I thought maybe I would teach in the college level, and then yeah. But so now I'm not doing any of that really. So I'm it's sort of a none of the above, which I think is the most exciting answer, none of the above, or all of the above, I guess.
Well, I know in your first book, in your memoir, Saigon, you talk about growing up, in a Vietnamese refugee family in mostly white, mostly working class, Carlisle, Pennsylvania. So I wonder, and I know you've talked about, trying to fit in as a kid there and sort of learn the culture that was around you. And I wondered how that helped shape your future, shape the things that you would go on to do? If you could think of a few certain ways that shaped you.
Yeah,
you think?
that's so interesting. Like I think like it was the 70s and the 80s, so like there wasn't this like I think like American culture was still very much like assimilation that's the program, right? Like they give you the brochure and it's like assimilate. And my parents were like read the brochure and they're like, great, like I guess we're going to all assimilate. And like that was like their goal. Like they really wanted to raise like all American kids, and like it was really important to my parents that like my brother and I like speak flawless English and read books and things like that. And they really felt that if we did that, sort of the all the doors would open. They didn't really know about things like racism or structural inequities and things like that. That's okay. It wasn't in the brochure. Maybe it was in the fine print. I don't know.
Yeah.
And so I think, I think so. I definitely studied and went into and grew up in small town Carlisle almost like as an anthropologist, like taking notes. I was like, is this what cool kids are doing? Okay, so I'll do that. And like, okay, why are those kids getting picked on? I won't do that, but also like I love sort of like normal kid things like riding my bike around and shooting pellet guns at bottles and collecting comic books. But I think to your point, I think like I really loved high school. Like I really loved school and I really loved high school. And I think back to high school, and that was sort of like the last time that anyone expected me or encouraged me to be good at everything. Or let me reverse that. That was the last time that my parents were really disappointed at all the things I was bad at, Like I remember like bringing home report cards and my dad would be like, oh, like you're it's like you're like a sophomore in high school. You're taking like chemistry and like pre-algebra and, AP American history. And it's just like, it's a very, very random slate of things. And my dad is like, why aren't these all A's? And I was like, what, like, when else in your life is everyone just going to give you a report card and be like, Ray, I'm really disappointed in your geometry, but knitting, nice job, Like, so I think like I've carried that for some reason that like that really was very impactful for me. So I think like I loved the panoply of like the high school experience that, 1 minute you're just like getting dodgeballs thrown at you, and then the next minute you're like reading a Shakespearean sonnet. I think just like I really try to replicate that every day in my life, in a metaphorical way. No one's.
I was going to say how. How do you?
Well, I think I just try to. It's like I just crave input and I crave experience, like in a, not in a sustainable way and not in a dangerous way. Like I'm not trying to kill myself, but like I think I really love, sort of like high input and of all sorts of various things. Like my poor wife, like I send her articles and she's like, why do you have time to, who's reading this? Why are you sending this to me? Like it's just like memes, and then like an article about like how Paris is, sort of like creating like the mixité sociale and their like, their governance in Paris. And I was like, oh, this is really interesting. Like maybe Portland could try this. And then also I'm sending her like cat memes, and I don't know, I'm just very,
When you were doing your anthropological studies of Carlisle, Pennsylvania, what were the cool kids doing? And did you do that too?
Yeah, it depends on the grade. I mean, some of it was just like sports oriented. So like, and some of it was also access. So like skiing, was just sort of like cost prohibitive. My parents were just like, you're going to do what? Like strap wooden sticks to your legs and like fly down a snowy mountain? That sounds dumb. We're not going to do that. Or like camp. Like my parents, so there were some things that were just sort of like cultural barriers for my parents, or financial barriers for us. But so it was mostly just like music, and it was back when I think like we still, for better or worse, like America was still kind of monocultural, right? There were like 3 channels on TV, 4 including PBS, and we had a TV that our TV was like broken, and so we never got NBC. So it's like this very weird, like 20, if you count the network program, so like 33% of my programming is just like it's like a dead space. Like wow. I never saw any of the NBC.
So you've never heard of Cheers?
No, I know about it, but I've never seen it. I actually just watched like the Cheers in the last like 10 years, maybe for the first time. Huh. Yeah. So like A-Team, like I would go to school and kids would be like, did you see the recent episode of the A-Team? I'd be like, yeah, like, yeah. What was your favorite part? You know, so my anthropology really taught me to ask a lot of questions and nod, you know, and just like.
So how did you start to, I guess, whittle down all the things that you could be good at or bad at in high school to the things that you pursued in college and beyond?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I mean, you know, as we heard about my resume, I don't know if I did a lot of whittling down. It's still kind of a train wreck. I mean, I think I say yes to adventure, and if I've never done it, you know, I will definitely say yes. And if it sounds a little bit dangerous, then I will absolutely say yes. So I just think I'm really fueled by an appetite for experience, and then also I think if it will make a good story later, I will also definitely say yes to that.
How did you pick Bard College in New York?
It was financial. It was totally a financial decision. Yeah, so it was like 1990. I was applying to colleges, you know. So this was like whatever, doing the math, 34 years ago, and. So I applied to Penn State, you know, which was like my safety. So I got into there. It was a state school. I applied to NYU, University of Pennsylvania, and Bard. And Bard was like this like late breaking dark horse college. Like I was working at this smoothie kiosk at the mall, and I would also go and loiter at the bookstore across the way. And then the bookstore clerk there just said, "Hey, like you should apply to Bard." Seems because I was only going to apply to those 3 schools, and the guy at the bookstore was like, "You should apply to Bard. It's kind of like a cool, like punky school." And I was like, "Oh, okay, like that sounds cool." I didn't know there was like a punk rock college, but I'll go there. So I like mailed away for the brochure, and they mailed it back to me, and I read it. So yeah. So I got into Penn State, and then I got into NYU, but did not get enough financial aid, and then I got waitlisted at UPenn. And then Bard sent me, gave me the most money to go to college. So it was kind of, for my family, it was kind of a no-brainer. Like it was a financial decision.
Sure.
Yeah.
And was it at Bard that you started to be interested in classical literature and Latin?
So I went off like thinking like, oh, I'm gonna like double major in art and English because that's like really those are where my passions are. You know, like I love to read and write, and I love to draw and paint, and then I got there and I think, you know, there's like speaking of sort of like gaps, you know, like I had such sort of unrealistic expectations for college. You know, if you've read my memoir, it's like I sort of like did all like my sort of nincompoopery, like adolescent, like stupidity in high school. And so I really like thought college was like, kids are going to be mature. They're going to come here and read great books and all those things. And so like, I was really like genuinely appalled that like kids did things like skip classes or like not do their homework. I was like, what are you guys like fucking idiots? Like, do you know how much money this place costs to go here? This is so expensive. Like, I want to take all the classes. So I just was really disappointed. Like I remember like going to English class. Like I remember at Bard and like kids like hadn't read the book, and I was like, what is going on? This is insane. And then I was in my art class, and you know, I thought I was doing a good job drawing, and I was like looking at other kids' drawings, and I was like, those aren't that good, but like they're really good at explaining them and like what, you know. So I just was very, disillusioned, and I placed that blame squarely on me. Like I did not have realistic expectations for what unencumbered 18-year-olds were going to do their first year of college. So anyway, so that's when I heard that kid talking about Greek, and then I was like, I want to do that because it sounded like the thing you couldn't fake your way through. Like you either know Greek or you don't. Like
right.
You know, like you can't sort of like muddle your way through like you can in English class or art class. Sorry, folks. Yeah, it's true. Yeah.
And did you just work your way up from Greek to Latin?
Yeah, I did everything like ass backwards.
Goes,
no,
or?
It's so terrible. Yeah, like everything else. So I did Greek. It was like, so I did not wear corrective eyewear, and then I studied Greek, and then I studied Greek so hard that I ended up having to wear glasses. Like I went like blind doing ancient Greek, and then I loved it so much that the next year I was like, what's harder than Greek? And our classics program also offered Sanskrit. So I was like, well, that sounds really terrible. I'm going to do that. So I did Sanskrit the next year. So my sophomore year, I was studying Greek and Sanskrit, and at that point, I had like too many credits in the department. So they're like, we think you need to be a classics major, and I hadn't learned Latin yet. So I went off to, there's a program in New York City called the Summer Latin Institute, and they teach you 3 years of Latin, college Latin, in 3 months.
Wow.
So I went off and I did that.
It sounds terrible.
No, it sounds amazing. It was amazing. It was like the attrition rate is very high, but it's like it was like boot camp run by like, Latin nerds. And like you learn all of Latin grammar in 5 weeks, I think, and then you spend the rest of the summer reading like, Virgil and Cicero and Caesar and stuff like that. Anyway, but I had already, so I showed up and I was like, I already know Greek and Sanskrit. And they're like, oh, okay. Like, you'll be fine. I was like, yeah, I'll be fine. So yeah, and then I thought I wanted to go to grad school in Germany because I had a great, they have a very, very storied and legendary sort of like classics legacy in Germany. And so I thought, well, I want to go to grad school in Germany also because it's free. And so I signed up for German immersion my junior year. And so there was a semester where my only classes were Greek, Latin, German, and Sanskrit. And it was that was rough. Yeah, that was a lot.
Wow.
Yeah. And then I dropped Sanskrit because it was just like, the return on investment wasn't there. It was like too much effort for not enough.
And the whole time you were taking all these things, you still wanted to be a teacher?
Yeah. Because I definitely did not know what else to do with that pile of stuff. Yeah, I remember my grandparents, when I was taking Latin, they were asking me, what are you going to do? And I sort of like made it. I was like, well, I could be a priest or an exorcist. What do you want?
So how did you end up in Maine? Did you come to Maine to teach, or?
No, well, yes and no. So I ended up in New York City, and I lived there for a while, and then my wife, who is a real-life Mainer and was living in Maine when we started dating, I tricked her into moving to New York City for a little while, and then in 2003, we were sort of doing the math on, like, having kids and owning a home and maybe opening up a business, and then she showed me the brochure for Maine, and she was like, the way life should be.
That's right.
I was like, oh, I like that. That's good marketing, Maine. So yeah.
But how did you trick her into moving to New York City briefly?
Actually, you know what? I did not try. I'm being facetious. I actually offered to move to Portland in 1999, 2000. And she said, well, actually, I've always wanted to live in New York City, so why don't I join you? And if it's like, not fun, then we can move back to Maine. But yeah, so. Yeah.
And that's when you started teaching, when you were here?
Yes. Well, I taught in New York City too. So as soon as I finished grad school, I was teaching in New York City as well at like a fancy private school.
So how did you start becoming a tattoo artist then?
Yeah.
That would have been when you were in college or in New York?
Yeah, no. So I was always interested in tattoos. So like I grew up in the '80s, like in Carlisle, PA. Like I was part of like the skateboarding and punk rock scene, and kids just naturally like do things that their parents don't want them to do, like tattoo themselves. But so my friends would go and get tattoos, and I was drawing tattoos designs for my friends. I just didn't have the money to get tattooed. I'm going to tell a side tangent here. So I didn't have money to get tattooed, and this one day there was one guy in our area in the Cumberland Valley, in I think it was Enola, the town of Enola. There was one guy, his name was Crazy Luke. I'm not making any of this up. His name was Crazy Luke, and he had a lazy eye, and he was a tattooer. And he would tattoo, he wouldn't card you, so that's why all my 16 and 17-year-old friends would go and get tattooed by Crazy Luke. And we were riding up there, and my friend Mark, for whom I'd drawn this like design, was riding up, and I get in the back seat, and Mark's got a toaster oven in his lap. And I was like, we're driving up, and after like maybe a few minutes, I'm like, why do you have a toaster oven in your lap? And he's like, oh, if you don't have money, Crazy Luke will tattoo you for an appliance. And I was like, oh. He's like, yeah. He was like, you could totally get tattooed, But like, I was like, I don't think I'm gonna take like my parents' VCR, and I would just never hear the end of it. So anyway, so my friends I was very interested in tattooing and getting tattoos, and then so when I got to college, my parents gave me this like emergency credit card in case like I needed bail money or something. And I discovered that it had a cash advance function. So I started taking money out on the credit card and paying for tattoos in college. Wow. So that's when I started getting tattooed. And then I kept getting tattooed through undergraduate and then graduate school. And then at some point, so I was living in Massachusetts at the time, going to grad school there. But tattooing was illegal in Massachusetts up until very recently, like early early 2000s, I think, was when it finally became legal. So I would be taking a Greyhound bus from Massachusetts to New York City to get tattooed.
Wow.
I did this for like 2 years. And then right at the end of that, the guy who was tattooing me, was like, hey, seems like you're really into tattoos. Like, you should be a tattooer. And I was like, how do you become a tattooer? He's like, oh, well, we're looking for an apprentice. Like, you should apply to be the apprentice. And so, like, I went back to Massachusetts and I did like 10 drawings. And this is pre-internet. I stuck it in an envelope. I mailed it off to the tattoo shop. And then 2 weeks later, the owner of the shop called me and he was like, hey, looked at your drawings, are pretty good. If you want to move to New York City, we'll teach you how to be a tattooer. And I was like, okay, let me finish my master's and then I'll be right there. As one does, right? Anyway,
wow.
High input. I just like high disparate input.
And how many tattoos do you have personally?
I mean, I don't count them. It's like the hard drive is maybe like 85% full. So yeah, so I have to, yeah.
Do you have one or two that are like the most meaningful for any particular reason?
I mean, I have a portrait of my grandfather. My grandfather passed away maybe like 15, 20 years ago. I got a portrait 15 years ago. I got a portrait of him. That's pretty meaningful. But they all have like funny stories or weird stories. I love them. I love them all for different reasons. Like, and some of the tattoos that I have that are most meaningful are also kind of like the ugliest. But it doesn't. That's part of it. I think. Like, I think you're there to sort of commemorate a time and a moment in your life. And just as a side piece, like I think like being a tattooer, I think is so. It's really like a great honor for me. Like, I really do love it because I feel like I get this front row seat to the human experience. Like, I get to see people at, like, they're there to commemorate either like an absolute high in their life, like my daughter was just born, or like an absolute sort of the nadir of like the human experience. So I think it's really powerful if you're sort of open to that, to being being part of that conversation, and to sort of bearing witness to these people who are going through celebrating joys and like sort of grieving and sort of all things in between. Yeah.
Did that experience of watching, like you say, the sort of range of human experience and all your customers over the years, you said you've been doing this 27 years or so, did that influence you wanting to write your own memoir?
No, not at all. No. I wrote the memoir stuff, just kind of like happened. I mean, it sort of like came out of like a bunch of things, sort of like funny dominoes. So I gave a TED talk in 2012, as one does. And I just thought like and then that sort of like got some national attention that ended up being on the TEDx, like the TED Radio, NPR's TED Radio Hour. And then I started doing live storytelling in and around Portland because of the sort of TED Talk and encouragement from people.
How did the TED Talk happen?
Yeah, so a good friend of mine emailed me one day and he said, hey, like, Maine's doing these like TEDx talks. He's like, I'm going to nominate you. Are you okay with that? And I was like, I don't know, sure. That sounds really terrible and hard and scary. Yeah, absolutely, sign me up. So he put my name into like the sort of executive committee, I guess, or whoever was deciding. And then I went, and sort of like pitched them an idea for a TED Talk. And then they were like, that sounds crazy. Yeah, we want you on stage. So. Yeah.
And what was your TED Talk about?
So, it was the first, so it was like the first time that I had like really ever talked about like the refugee experience and like the experience of growing up in small town PA. And so I really wanted to talk about that, but I also wanted to talk about things that were important to me, like, grammar and like pop culture and Star Wars and John Hughes and, sort of like the 80s and punk rock. And so I thought, yeah, I can talk about all of that in 12 minutes. Like, what's the worst that could happen? So it's about like sort of the difference between English and Vietnamese, specifically verbal moods, like the indicative and the subjunctive. It's called like, what is it called? The dark side of the subjunctive, I think, or something. I don't remember the title of it. Something like that. Yeah. And so it was just kind of like a wild train wreck, like everything else, but it kind of worked out. I mean, lots of things don't work out for me. Just so you know, it's not like I'm like sort of like keep stepping in like magical shit or something.
But that led to either you getting an agent or you getting some attention from a.
Yeah. So that TED Talk, So I did that in 2012, and then in 2016, I got this email from this literary agent in New York City, and she was just like, "Hey, late to the game, but I just saw your TED Talk. I loved it. Would you ever consider writing a memoir? And I was like, oh, I don't know, maybe like, so I like ghosted her for a while, you know, because it was just like really, I was tattooing full time, I was teaching full time, I had, you know, 2 young kids at home and all those other things. And so like once a month for about 4 months, she would like email and be like, hey, like still really interested if you would ever consider writing. And so one weekend I was just like, okay, fine. So I like wrote an essay and like sent it off to her. And then she was like, oh my God, I love this. I'm faxing you a contract for representation. And I was like, oh no. Guess I have to write a book now. So, yeah.
And had you done much writing between like college and the TED Talk and the book?
Not really, no. I mean, no, not that kind of personal essay stuff. Right. No. But I mean, I think, yeah, I mean, I hadn't, but I think I think every time when I would, when I write, I think I write to entertain myself and to, I mean, that's E.B. White's and many other great writers, but, since we're in Maine, that's E.B. White's advice, right, is that you write for an audience of one, and that helps you write in an authentic way, it helps you write in a true way. And at the end of the day, you feel great about the thing that you wrote because you were writing it for yourself anyway. So
had you done? I wondered for your memoir if you had journals from either your childhood or young adulthood that you used that you could draw upon for your, or was it all from memory?
No, it was all from memory. Yeah. And there was a disclaimer in the front of the memoir that says, like I conflate things and move things around. But actually, the storytelling that I did in and around Portland and Brunswick, like with sound bites and a couple of other things, like that was really like a crucible for really tight writing. Because it was like you had 7 minutes. Like you had 7 minutes to like tell a beginning, a middle, and an end, and keep people entertained, and maybe crack a joke or two. So like that was really, really like a steep and difficult but great learning curve for me. And so I think by the time I did that for 4 or 5 years, and so by the time the opportunity came for me to write a memoir, I'd already done like I probably had crafted like 7 or 8 of those like little vignettes from my life already. So at least I knew how to tell like a 7-minute story. I figured I could expand that a little bit to 300 pages. Yeah.
But then with your children's book that just came out, Cranky, that's a whole different kind of writing. And I know you just said that not everything works out for you, but how did you get to write the book Cranky?
Yeah, so my memoir came out in April of 2020, so that was a great time for books to come out. And then, maybe like 6 months in, I got this, DM, like a direct message in my Instagram from somebody who just said like, hey, really enjoyed your memoir. And I was like, hey, thanks. And then maybe like 3 months later after that, she messaged me again and said, I happen to be an agent for children's book illustrators, and my illustrator and I are looking around for a writer who can bring this character to life, and we think you might be like the right guy. Would you ever consider writing a children's picture book? And I was like, oh, I don't know, but always take the meeting, folks. If you get nothing else from this conversation, always say yes to the meeting. So I was like, sure, let's get on a Zoom. And then so we got on the Zoom, and she sort of like, I was like, tell me about this character. And she said, well, he's kind of like, I'll say this. Should I say it? He's an asshole construction crane. And I was like, ooh. And I was like, okay, is it like...
For a children's book.
Yeah. I mean, she may not have used the term asshole. Maybe I just heard that. But anyway, I'm actually probably pretty positive she did not use the term asshole construction crane. But I said, oh, that sounds interesting. Is it like a character arc where he's like an asshole at the beginning and he's like not an asshole at the end and like his friends help him not be an asshole? And she said, no, it's a totally flat character arc. We think you'd be perfect for it. And I was like, okay.
Wow.
So, and at that point, you have kids. Like you read a lot of children's books to your kids. And so I just thought, well, that sounds hilarious. I think I could write that story, or at least write a story that would make me laugh. So that's what I did. And I sent it to her. And I said, I'll just write it on spec, which means like you don't have to pay me. It's 32 pages. I'll just write it. And if you like it, great. If you don't, no harm, no foul. So I sent it off to her, and then I, messaged her a couple days later, and I said, "Hey, did you get the manuscript?" And she's like, "Yes, I loved it. I called up my editor at HarperCollins. I read it to her over the phone. She loves it. They'll be in touch." So that's how the children's book happened.
So Cranky is a crane
Yeah.
with a bad attitude.
Yeah.
But what is his backstory? Like what brought him to this place? Who is he?
Yeah, who's Cranky? That's funny. I actually wrote like a little Cranky manifesto so I could like have his. Yeah, I mean, I think the idea. Well, Cranky is just he's a crane, and he's. So he's a crane like Bluey is a dog, like he's got like anthropomorphic things, but he's also ultimately like a construction vehicle. And he's just in a bad mood most of the time. And he doesn't always want to talk to you about why, because it doesn't matter, because he's also really good at his job. And so I think like I wanted to write a story, and we have children, and one of my children is pretty cranky, a lot of the time, but I love her, but she's cranky. And but we don't try to fix her mood. Like we don't want her to feel like pathologized, as if like your feelings are something that you have to fix. Like if she wants to be cranky, let her be cranky. But I think like the message for Cranky in the book is that Cranky's really good at his job. He still shows up and he does what's expected of him. So even if you're cranky, you still got to go to school. You still got to do your chores. But you don't have to answer for your feelings. Like your feelings are your feelings.
So did you like the idea, or it sounds like you came up with a children's book that is different than some children's books in that we don't have to fix if somebody is crying,
Yeah.
if somebody's in a bad mood,
Yeah.
right? We don't necessarily have to fix that. We don't have to solve that. Is
Yeah.
that part of what you were doing?
For
with
sure.
Cranky?
Yeah. Because I mean, I think that was just like there's really nothing new under the sun, but I felt like that was kind of like a fresh take on something that I had learned from my own parenting and also from more than 20 years of being a teacher and being an advisor, was that, there were things that you can't fix for kids, and that's okay too, but you can sit there with them and be witness to those things. And maybe that's related to the tattooing thing too. I don't know. Like the idea that like you're just there to bear witness, and that, trouble shared is trouble halved, I don't know. But so it was really strange. Like when I was a teacher at Waynfleet for a long time, they sent me off to this like sort of like counseling boot camp. And one of the things that I learned on there that just blew my mind was one of the instructors said, "Don't ever say to kids it'll be okay." And I was like, like what? I was like, here I was like this like 40-year-old man. I was like, I say that all the time. They're like, it just like undermines your credibility. You can't guarantee it. Like all those things. Like
Yeah.
there are things that you can say to kids to comfort them, but like it will be okay is like not one of those things. Like that like blew my mind.
Yeah,
Like,
sure.
So yeah.
I think most of us parents have said that 100 times a day to our kids when they were little.
Yeah. I don't know if I don't. My kids are kind of hardened now by me and my parenting, so I don't, they're very sweet people. But.
What was sort of the biggest challenge or difference, I guess, writing a children's book compared to writing your memoir?
Oh boy, the brevity of it. It's like so dense, so condensed. Like you really, like every word counts in a really different way. And also the collaborative piece, that like I'm working with an illustrator and I want to leave room for Pete to sort of like do his jokes and like write things that are, draw things that are funny and all those things. So, and that's an unknown, and that was I deeply trusted Pete, because he was the one who had come up with this character and he sort of was trusting me with it. So, so I think, I think like the denseness of children's book writing is very different. I find it sort of adjacent to poetry in a way, and definitely nobody wants to read my poetry. So,
Did you find yourself inspired by or even referring to some of your own favorite children's books when you did this, or what some of those are?
I don't. Yeah, no, not really, because I think like those books are their own books. Like I think in both writing my memoir and in writing Cranky, this comes from something, it's like you give a lot of advice to people because it's free and you're just like, sure. And then finally you're like, you know what, that's pretty good advice. I should take my own advice. So when I was at Waynflete, someone thought it was a good idea for me to work in college counseling for a while. I don't know why. So I worked in college counseling for about 5 years, and I worked with seniors working on their essays. And I always said to the seniors, and then I was like, oh, that's good advice, Phuc. You should take that own advice. I said to my seniors, when they were working on their college essays, the best essay that you can write, Ray, is the essay that only you could have written, because that is your truest and most authentic self, and that's like the colleges will either want that or they don't. But at the end of the day, like that's like you don't want to game the system by like being like, I went on this volunteer trip to Guatemala delousing orphans or whatever. And maybe you did that, and that's fine. But like you got to write the essay that only Ray could have written. So it's my long answer. That's my long way of answering your question, which is like the best children's book that I could write is the children's book that only I could have written. And I definitely feel like I did that with Cranky, and I definitely feel like I did that with my memoir. There's a Hall & Oates joke in Cranky. Like who else is insane enough to do that? So yeah.
But do you have a couple favorite children's books of your own that you
for sure.
think about?
Yeah.
sometimes?
I love Shel Silverstein. From when I was a kid till even now. I think also I think the idea. I think like Maurice Sendak, Where the Wild Things Are, is I think there's like a emotional resonance between the two, in the same way that like I think he's not trying to fix Max's bad, like Max is like not kind and he's in a bad mood and and he sort of just disappears into the land of the wild things. Like nobody's trying to fix it. It ends different, but I think there's like there's a piece of it there that is taking his childhood very seriously. And I think for me, in both the memoir and the children's book, like I really want to take my own childhood and just childhood in general very seriously. Like I don't want to pander to kids, and that part of that is like taking their emotional life seriously, and not eye roll at it.
Do you have a dream book? If you could write any kind of book about anything, what that might be?
Oh, I'm working on a novel right now that nobody wants to read. Yeah. It was really fast. So a couple of years ago, I saw my agent in New York, and and so the publishing industry like really wants you to stay in a lane, and surprise, surprise, I'm terrible at staying in one lane. And so my agent is like, look, like the expectation is that like you write more nonfiction. I was like, ugh, boring. So I had this idea for a novel, and so I've been doing research, and sort of started it in fits and starts. But I'm excited. I did start writing it, and then the children's book stuff came up, and then I was working on it. So it's a little bit tricky for me to bounce back and forth between voices and themes and things like that. But I am very excited about a novel.
Can you say what it's about? Or?
I cannot.
No.
Yeah. Well, I could, but it would not end well for.
You'd have to kill me after. Okay.
Yeah, sorry.
And I think we're going to take questions from the audience in a minute, but I had one other question that actually this had come originally from a reader, but I want to expound on this because Phuc was telling me some things that I find very interesting. But the question was, how many times have you performed 99 Red Balloons at karaoke?
Right.
And you told me that you performed karaoke in your home with your family. So can you explain that a little bit?
Sure. So the answer, I was corrected, as I often am by my wife, correctly. So I have done it twice, 99 Red Balloons, twice in German. So during the pandemic, right, it's like Saturday night in 2020, and we're like, what are we doing? We're not going out. So we started, like we had sort of like this like janky setup with like microphones, and then like each year, like for Christmas, like we would like get one more thing that like sort of like raised the bar for the karaoke. So and we kept doing it, and so
did you have a machine, a karaoke machine?
No. So they have now. There's like an app, so you get it on your laptop. It says like 80,000. It's like 100,000 song library.
Wow.
And then like we might hook it up to our television, and there might be like it's like pretty. The most recent thing that happened was. Our family, our kids and my wife and I watched Schitt's Creek as a family, and then we were watching that, and my kids were like, "Oh my gosh, I love Moira's wigs," and so then we went on to Amazon, online, and like bought like a box of like wigs to wear for karaoke. So now it's like now it's just like a real thing. So yeah, so we do a lot of karaoke at our house.
Wow, that's great.
Yeah.
Well, I think we can open it up for the last 15 minutes or so to questions. Strawberry has the mic back there.
Thank you, everyone, for coming out. I know, and I hope you all have power and survived the storm okay. And if you don't have power, I'm sorry. Come have a warm meal at my house.
And if you have a question, just put your hand up. I'll come to you.
Hi, good evening.
Hi.
Early on in your talk, you used the term structural inequities in connection with that brochure. How could you define that? I'm curious about how you define that term and how it impacted you specifically and all your accomplishments.
Oh, yeah, sure. I mean, I think there are opportunities. I mean, I think when I say structure, I guess I mean like in society, right? Like there are ways that you are invisible to people, and then there are ways that you are highly visible to people. So here's a great example. And this is like this was like a great learning moment for both me and my wife. So when we first came to Maine in 2003, and we were looking for a space to open up our business, I said to her, "You should call around to potential landlords and real estate people as we're inquiring about business space." And she was like, "Why?" And I was like, "Nobody will call me back." And she was like, "No." And I was like, "Sure. No, they will not call me back." And she she was just like, "No, this is like it's 2003, And I was like, "All right, fine. Here's a list of 10. I have a list of 10. Let's both call them and see how many people we get called back." You can correct me if I'm wrong. I think you got all callbacks? No. 8. You got 8?
Woman.
Oh, yeah, right. So she got like 8, and I got 2? Maybe none? Anyway, it was stark. And she was like, "Holy shit." And I was like, yeah. So, I mean, so there are things like that. So, I mean, I think that's just like one example. So, like, I don't know, and this has actually been well documented in the book Freakonomics by Levitt and Dubner as well, where it's just things like if you just change the name on a resume, but the resume is exactly the same, like certain people get callbacks and certain people don't. So, I mean, have I missed out on opportunities just because like I have a non-Anglo-European name? I don't know. I mean, that was a small, I had my suspicions, but then also, I think like my wife has shown me areas in which there are things that she has to endure and suffer as a woman in this world that I do not as a man. So like here's like some really kind of terrible calculus that we do. Like sometimes when we're traveling somewhere and we have to interact with somebody, we'll look at each other and we'll literally be like, who will get better customer service in this scenario? Me as a white woman or you as a brown man? And then we'll be like, well, like if it's like the boiler guy or the plumber, he probably will respect you as a man more. But like if we're like at a hotel, like they'll probably, it's just like, it's like the calculus that we have to do. So I don't, and so yeah, I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
In the memoir, I was moved by the teacher that went to your parents' house
Yes.
unannounced.
Yeah, Mrs. Booth.
What
yeah.
on earth did she say to him? And did you ever get any more information about it?
I don't. I mean, only from what my father reported to me. Like so. When my second grade teacher came to our house to intervene, like my brother and I were sent off into another room. So, and then afterwards, my parents just said, she told us not to spank you guys as much. So I only know what my parents reported to me, but that was it, And I felt like it was, it's one of those moments in the memoir where I felt, disingenuous for me to report that something happened otherwise, or that I knew somehow what she said, because I just didn't know.
It changed the vector of your childhood.
Yeah, very much so. Yeah, I think so. Yeah, yeah. And I think, and it's amazing because I think in this day and age, like it would just be like DHHS and like sort of all sorts of other interventions and maybe foster care and all those things. So I think that would have been much worse potentially for me and my brother. So I appreciate that she felt she took the time to just have a conversation with my parents, like as, you know, human beings who are going through, you know, this sort of unimaginable thing with their children. So, meaning like the refugee experience, right? Like having your entire country like collapse and being resettled in a new country where you didn't speak the language and had to endure all these other things. Yeah. Thank you.
Hi.
Hi.
I found delightful and just, I don't even know, I was trying to identify with it, and I can in certain ways, but your name Phuc, which is not pronounced that way in Vietnamese.
Correct, yeah.
But you had sort of three options of ways it could be pronounced.
Yeah.
And one of them was Phuc, and your father kind of said, go with that one, or I'm remembering
Yeah,
it wrong,
yeah,
but it's
yeah.
something like that.
Yeah.
So you ended up sort of randomly with this pronunciation, which is perilously close to other words it
Yeah.
could be confused with.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
one might imagine that that's a little bit of a burden to bear as a young boy.
Yeah.
And then I loved when you chose the name Peter,
Yeah.
and then you found out that Peter is
Yeah.
a pseudonym for a male genital,
yeah.
and you went, oh my God.
I was not the anthropologist that I thought
Solve
I
the
was.
problem. I'm going to go back to Phuc. This is just too complicated.
Yeah, yeah,
And I
yeah.
love that story, but I thought to myself, what if you had pronounced your name differently? I mean, in some ways, Phuc is easy to pronounce,
Yeah.
but like, how would, I guess we can't ask her how would it have changed things.
Yeah.
But it's sort of like Phuc, Peter, I don't know.
Yeah.
What is there in a name?
A lot.
Yes.
Quite a bit. I mean, you know, as I
Yes.
mentioned, right? Like
Yeah.
you change the name on a resume and you either get the call back or you
Yes.
don't. You call landlords to rent a place.
And that
if your
story
name is-
reminded me of the story, and I thought to myself, well, what if you'd stuck with Peter or Paul or any of the other Beatle names you could have had?
Yeah, right, which is what all my aunts and uncles did. You know, so this is like a really interesting thing. Like, I don't know if you know this, but like in France, up until very recently, it was illegal to have a non-French name to children born in France. So you had to be named like Claude or Jean-Paul or like Mathieu. So all of my cousins in France, you know, it's like sort of the beauty of the diaspora. It's like I have a lot of family in France. Like all of my cousins' names are like Aline and Pascal and Annalise, you know. They have like a secret Vietnamese name, but it's not on the record or anything. It's not on their driver's license or anything like that. So, and so in some ways, like maybe like the French have sort of circumnavigated sort of this like knee-jerk, you know, sort of racism or xenophobia or whatever, because everyone's name, you know, is going to be Michel or Jean-Claude or whatever. Yeah. So you don't. I mean, they just recently like changed that law. I think like in the 90s, like I think was when they finally relaxed it. But yeah, that was. So that's fascinating. So I think like what's in a name, like it should be like nothing is in a name, but the fact is that.
I just wondered if you got to write as Paul.
Yeah.
Tran.
Yeah.
Tran is not Tran you can pronounce it
Sure.
as well.
Yeah. I mean, at this point, yeah, it is the unanswerable question, but I mean, my brother's name is Louis, you know, so like people are like, wait, what? Like, you know, yeah. And he's a lawyer and an engineer, so I think there's a lot. I think things worked out. I mean, like, you know, things worked out pretty well for him, and he's got a good, nice Anglo name.
Reading your book, I was fascinated by it.
Thank you.
Our book club
Thanks.
read it. We all loved it.
Oh, thanks.
Just to tell you that.
Yeah.
But
Cranky, right?
but you fit in with the punk rockers because that's where you could fit
Sure.
in. But you must have been an exceptional student because with them you couldn't act like they, although I think in the book they identified you as being real smart, but you were really lucky to have the teachers and the mentors during your high school years. That must have been a big turning point for you.
Yeah, I mean, all the way through.
Yeah,
All the way through.
yeah.
had
I mean,
such
it was
great
just,
teachers.
you must
Yeah.
have been a remarkable young man
Oh, thanks. I
to
don't-
live in both worlds,
Gosh.
because you were living in both worlds.
I mean,
Yeah.
besides living in sort of my family home, I mean,
Right.
I think I was.
But I mean,
always-
in your head,
Yeah,
you're a
for
punker
sure.
and
Oh,
you're
thanks.
an intellectual trying to read all the classics, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think
I thought it was remarkable.
Oh, thank you. I
Yeah.
appreciate that.
Yeah.
I mean, and I think my takeaway or my message is, you know, how like school was my safe place. Like that was a place that I felt, like English class, my English classroom was the place that I felt the most, sort of protected. I felt seen and valued and understood. I certainly did not feel that way in my home, and I did not feel that way on the streets of my town.
Yeah.
So.
But how great for you that the teachers could see that in you.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate. I really, and it was.
You would have that outward appearance of the punk.
Sure. Yeah. And it's been like the great joy of the last decade, 5 years even, is reconnecting with my English teacher. Like in the research of the book, I really reconnected with her and went out and did research. Yeah, it's been really great to see her. Yeah.
So I have a writer's question.
I like this.
In writing a memoir,
Yeah.
obviously you addressed issues, family, brothers, and, as a young child, the third rail. How did you manage that? And how did you manage your family? And how did you let them know they were going to be in this book? And how did they handle it? It's a strain. Yes, that. I'm not super close with my parents, and I think that like at this point, like I've always been sort of like the iconoclast or the black sheep in the family, so I wasn't really worried about offending anyone. And so it was really very freeing in the memoir writing process. Like I've spoken and mentored other memoir writers for whom they have an important relationship, and they feel like if they write this memoir and they write their truth, it may fracture that relationship. And I think, well, maybe you don't necessarily need to publish it, and I always say like that the writing piece and the sharing piece are two separate things, that you can write anything you want and then just put it in a drawer and then save it. But the writing piece is important. Like if you keep gravitating towards a thing that you need to write, then I think you need to write it. But do you need to share it with everybody or anybody? No, not necessarily, and maybe not right away. Or there's a timing piece to it as well. I just feel very lucky that I didn't have to take into regard my parents' feeling. Not that I was writing to be cruel to my parents, but there were truths and experiences that I had to write about that were seminal in my childhood. My father, all he has said was like, your book was very painful to read, and I did not like it, but I don't know what else I could say about that. And I don't blame him for that. I think it's absolutely like a valid, response to the book, and from a cultural piece too, I think it's like very culturally, it's like anathema for me to like come out and share all this, sort of like dirty laundry from our family, I'm sure it is too for, sort of like other families too. Like I can only speak to my own, but yeah. Oh, yeah.
Hi, Phuc.
Hi.
I had a quick question. You started to answer it at the tail end of your comment about, I don't want to co-opt the terminology coming out, especially with families chosen or biological, but there's a specific scene in Saigon where you and Louis are given, I believe, like a back to school clothing stipend, and you're deep in your punk rock, identity, and you make a case of being more spendthrift. And it's this really beautiful scene where you share what you share with your family, but I can get more if I go to, a thrift store. And what lives completely rent-free in my brain is the analogy you use is that you've run out of space in your capacity of Vietnamese, which is my native language as well, and your parents have at that place have run out of emotional capacity in terms of being a parent or of language to understand you. And as I've like navigated my own life, I've wondered like how lonely that feeling has been. And I think that when we have the bravery to like share that with people, to release that almost that pressure valve, has it ever been for you, as you've done these 7-minute stories or even written Cranky or collectively been in writers' workshops, has it been like a pressurized release valve to be like, I cannot be this whole refugee storyteller, or the voice of poverty, or of starting over? I know that's a loaded question.
No, yeah, I think it hasn't. So it hasn't been, because I feel like, so thank you for asking that question. I think like what's, and correct me if I'm wrong, like I feel like what's like sort of like baked into your question is like was it therapeutic for me, right? My jokey but very honest response is, writing for me wasn't therapeutic. Therapy for me was therapeutic. And so, so I had done like I did a fair amount of therapy like the decade prior to writing the book. And that was really precipitated by my becoming a parent. Like, I think like when I found out that we were going to have kids, I was like, oh shit. I was like, I'm not bringing like my best self to being a parent. And so that's really what motivated me to go into therapy. And so like that was like probably like a decade before, no less, but so I had already done the therapy, and then the book opportunity came up. So the book opportunity was like really sort of not related to the healing process. Like I did sort of healing already, if that makes sense, I guess. But I think to your piece, like I think in therapy, like I think, it's like I have to be the parent that I wish I had but didn't have, and just sort of take care of myself in a way that like I can't expect my parents to, and that's okay. But I think thanks for naming it. It is a lonely, and it's that gap between parent and child, which exists in cultures even. I see it in parents, in non sort of refugee families as well. Like that's like it's just like a small tragedy of life that happens for a lot of us. And I think like that's like also like the universal piece of the book, maybe that you don't have to be a refugee or bicultural or bilingual, or to be like, oh, I wish my parents knew me better, or I wish my parents showed up for me in a way that they didn't, or I wish that they any number of things. There was like one last question over here. Maybe, do we have time? We running?
Yeah,
out
we
of time?
can take one more.
Okay.
I know we're at time.
I don't need the microphone.
I'll just get off. Yeah.
About parenting,
Yeah.
what do you say to your kids instead of "it's going to be okay"?
Mm. You mean if they're upset?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, she said you try to kind of find other ways to.
Yeah. I mean, I think it depends on the scenario. Like, I think, like asking them how they're feeling, asking them what I can do to, what do they need right now. I think as much as possible to get them to engage, like, hey, like, Ray, you seem really upset. Tell me about that. Or like, oh, that seems really disappointing for you. Like, what can I do to help you? Like, I think those are like little life hacks. Like, I think, at any, like I try to center my kids in like whatever sort of distress they're feeling. Like, and it's like let them own it too, and not fix it, and like just be, sometimes it'll just be like, and if I'm not in a place where I can handle it, like I am not like super dad, I'll just be like, can you just go and like have quiet time in your room, When my kids were really little, we used to send them to Screamtown, which is our attic. No, really, we'd be like, you need to go to Screamtown, and there was like a huge beanbag. We'd be like, go beat the shit out of that beanbag, and go scream it off, and then come back and let's talk about that. I don't know if that's good or not. Like check in like 10 years. We'll see if my kids also might write a memoir called Screamtown. I don't know. Who knows? Yeah. So yeah. Anyway, thank you so much for coming out, folks.
Thank you, everybody. Phuc, thank you very
Yeah,
much.
of course.
This was
Thanks.
great.
Thanks. And our good friends at Backcode Books, I think, have a pile of books back there. So I'm happy to sign books if you want to grab a book. I'll stick around also just for conversation. You don't have to buy anything to chat with me. So yeah, thanks again.